Hello, it's Cindy, and we're back again with David Martin for a Taste of Genealogy. This is the third in a series here so far. And today, David's going to walk us through the pedigree chart and how to start like that family tree that we all see, that you can work on now while you have time with your family and have the opportunity to reach out. So David, it's great to see you again. Thanks for meeting with me and doing this whole process. I think this is a great program.
Thank you, Cindy. Let me just review what we did in our first and second sessions to lead you to the context of what we're doing today. In our first session, we talked about the kinds of resources that you can take advantage of online in your bathrobe at home for searching out family relationships from the past. Then in our second session, we talked about something that was more specific, and that kind of thing related to the business of being able to put your ancestors, but particularly the living people in your family, into context. And that was the technique of the interview. So now, having covered those two things, let's begin to talk about how you will organize your data, because you'll start now beginning to be able to accumulate some information, and you want to be sure that it's organized for both for yourself and also to be able to retrieve it. So today we're going to talk about what Cindy referred to as the pedigree chart. Now, there are two options when you organize information genealogically. One is what we call a descendancy chart, and a descendancy chart is one where you pick a person in the past and you follow their connections all the way down to the present time or to some other person. But you can only do that if you've first done not past to present, but present to past. And so we always begin with going present to past, namely creating a pedigree chart for you. And this is sometimes known as a family tree, although necessarily this is not in the shape of an actual tree. There are some artistic renditions which do put them there, but they're rather awkward to read. This pedigree chart then is you-centered. And we'd like to talk about the chart itself before we talk about how to begin to use it. You'll notice that in the upper left-hand corner is the name of the free website that I mentioned in our first session, Family Search. That was familysearch.org. And you'll recall that I mentioned that although it is free, you do have to set up an account. And that is the website of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, otherwise known as the Mormons. So the question becomes, well, why would the Mormons be so outstanding in genealogical research? Because they are considered the world's top. They have over 10 billion records that are available for searching across the world. And the answer to that is that if you are a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or I'll just say LDS for short, one of the things that you do as part of that faith is you carry out searches for your ancestors and you prove their connection to you. And then you bring that information to a ceremony in a Mormon temple. And by the way, temples are only open to members of the LDS Church. And what you do is you consecrate their memory in a temporal ceremony so that they are united with you in death, even though they are maybe long passed away. And so the LDS Church has sent missionaries across the world to collect information from town halls, city halls, churches, and the like. Wow. And they have accumulated a huge body of information, as I mentioned. Of course, it's not everything, and nothing will ever be into the situation where we've accumulated everything. But this is absolutely the most outstanding collection that exists in the world. Wow. And to their credit, the LDS Church has made it available to everyone. And so this pedigree chart comes from them. And I'd like now to explain how to use it because it can be a little bit confusing at first. So let's come down to the middle of the left-hand side of the chart and the place which says you. And of course, you would write your name in there, the date that you were born, the place that you were born. If you're married, then the date that you were married, and then the place that you were married. If you are married, then you also put in the name of the person you're married to under, of course, spouse. But you notice that we only need to put name and born and place. We don't have to put married because that's already covered by you. And if your spouse has passed away, then you would put the death date and the death place there. So that middle part of the left-hand column is about you and your spouse. But that's the end of what you can do with your spouse's information, because then the rest of this chart is all about you yourself. Now you can create a second chart and put your spouse in the place where it says you, and then create his or her chart separately. But let's focus on you at this point. So now you have a father and a mother. Now, one of the questions becomes, well, suppose that your father is not really your biological father, but your stepfather. So you have to make a decision about which one you will put in, but normally we put in the biological father because this is a relationship chart that follows actually bloodlines. So let's go up a little bit to where it says father, and you see that the same information is there: name, born, that's born, the date, and then the place, married, and then the place, and then the death date if they passed away, and the place. And the numbering system becomes useful here because you're number one. Isn't that a wonderful thing? And your father's number is actually number two. So although this chart doesn't show it, I'd like you to write that in underneath the phrase your father. So that's number two. Let's go down to your mother. And that would be, of course, underneath the heading for spouse. And again, your mother's name, your mother's birth date, birthplace, and if she's no longer living, her death date and place. And you notice once again, we have no need for the married line there because the married line is up under your father.
David, I got a quick question on the death
Yes,
part. Now,
yes.
you put the place, like say they died in Hyannis, or like if, or where they were buried, like if it was in Mount Auburn Cemetery in Boston. Do you put both, or is that
Uh,
helpful? Or?
we usually put the place of the death, but you can choose to put the place of burial if you would rather.
Okay.
And if you do that, then for place, instead of the uh, the, you would put the burial place and you'd put BUR period in parenthesis,
Okay.
as opposed to the place where they passed away, which might have been a hospital.
Right.
Yes,
So many
that's a good.
people move around now where they might pass in Florida and then they're buried up here, or things
That's
like
right.
that. Yeah. Okay.
Uh,
Thank
now, some people put both down, and that's fine because that's good information to have. And you have space there. You can put place died and place buried, of course, add that in there in that blank space. And that, of course, would be true for the entire chart. So now put a numbering in for mother and put the number 3. So you're number 1, your father's number 2, and your mother is number 3. You can write a little 3 underneath your mother. So far we started with you, and we've got one generation back, your 2 parents. Now let's go back to the middle and see what we do as a next generation. So let's go back to father, and he was number 2, and And now we want to know about your father's parents. And so your father has a father and a mother, obviously. So that's your grandfather and your grandmother. And so you'd put the same information in there for your grandfather, that is your father's father. And uh, there's nothing new about the information that's asked for there, and the same information for your grandmother. Uh, and that's, again, your grandmother on your father's side. So let's do the numbering again. Can you guess what number your grandfather would be? We've got your father is 2 and your mother is 3. So your grandfather would be what? It, of course, would be 4. What do you notice is happening here with even numbers and odd numbers? You notice that all the males are going to be even and all the females, except you, are going to be odd. All right? And that's, I'm sorry, that's a
Man must
double
have done
meaning because some females are very odd, but we won't talk about that. So
that.
please write the number 4 under grandfather and number 5 under grandmother. Now let's come down and go opposite your mother again. And of course, your mother has parents. And so your mother's father would be the information you would fill in opposite your mother with that line that's going vertically. And then right opposite the heading for your mother, you would write the information for your grandmother. And now I'll bet you can guess the uh, uh, numbering system, because your mother's father would be number 6 and your mother's mother would be number 7. So we now have established a pattern, and we can go on now for further generations. But before we do that, let's stand back and look at what we have. By now, you may find that you have some blank spots. You may have all the information except the date of the marriage of your mother's parents. So therefore, you'll have a blank or a question mark under grandfather and married. Well, what does that mean? That means that's something that your search will now start to try to find. Now, I'm not saying that you should make a big uh, deal out of finding that particular thing. There may be other blanks that you find are more important to you to fill in. That information you may have tried to find, and it's just not at this moment findable. But the way that this chart is useful, other than as a recording device, is that it indicates to you where the holes are that you need to try to fill. And that'll become more obvious when we go to the right-hand column. So let's go back up to the top and look at your grandfather's father on your father's side, or in other words, at the top of the right-hand column, great-grandfather. And again, there's nothing new here. The same information is found, except that in order to fill the spaces in, they've left out married, you'll notice, under great grandfather. I think it's a very good idea to try to squeeze that in anyway, because actually you want to have that information. But for spacing purposes, for this one piece of 8 by 11 paper, they deliberately left it out. But I don't think you would want to leave it out. So now we see that your grandfather has parents, a great grandmother and a great grandfather. And your grandmother also has parents, great grandfather and great grandmother. And the same procedure is to be filled in as you go down the column. And so let's go down to the middle of the chart. And now, opposite your mother, we can see that we're interested now in finding out your mother's great your mother's excuse me your grandmother's parents, which is a great grandfather and a great grandmother. Um, in the case of this particular chart, I've skipped over the great grandparents that are just above or just seem to be opposite spouse. And that's because of a spacing problem. But you'll see that as you go out to the generations from moving from left to right, you're going to have a multiplier effect. And so you have two parents, four grandparents, but eight great grandparents. And so you can guess, if you're doing the math, that you're going to end up with 16 great great grandparents. And so you're going to run out of space fairly quickly. And therefore, that's the time when you perhaps will want to have a very large piece of paper. They do make them, and they can be rolled up, or you can make your own and put it together. I can tell you that there's nothing so rewarding as being able to stand back and see a chart that shows all of the family that you at least have identified so far out as far as you either wish to go or can go. And now is the time when you've done that, that you will then see very clearly where the holes are.
Yeah. It's
And
just
you,
it's so
yes,
amazing. Because I know people that have come to America and like, one couple, had like 8 kids, and then their 8 kids had like between 3 and 5 kids. And now they have something like 42 great children and like 12 great grandchildren. It's just amazing how two people can make this huge family tree, and it's incredible. And then the diversity of all of it is fascinating.
it certainly is. And what you've just talked about is the exact opposite of what we're talking about here. Namely, that's a descendancy chart, which you can create, and which is, as you say correctly, very impressive. Because then what you would do is you would take one particular person, a great grandfather on your father's side, for example, and track all of his family as they have come down. You'll notice that there's something that you can do with that that you cannot do with what we're talking about today. This pedigree chart has no space for anything other than direct ancestry. In other words, there's no spaces here for cousins or aunts or uncles or siblings. And that's deliberate. So to make it possible for you to track just directly and get that information out, and then to flip it around and then start, if you wish, with someone in the past, and then research their multiple children and their multiple spouses and their multiple offspring, which, as you said correctly, ends up with an impressively large number of people on the bottom line when you come down to the present generation.
This is a
So
great way to start.
yes, it is. And this is exactly what I'm recommending, that you start with you and go backward, and don't worry about aunts or uncles or cousins or siblings. In fact, some people don't even put a spouse on, although I think that's a very nice idea. But this is what the LDS Church provides as a tool, because, of course, they're interested in helping people who are members of the church to find their direct ancestors and bring them to the ceremony in the temple. So we're talking about then a basically two-step process. One is creating a pedigree chart and using the chance as you can to fill in the holes that will then show up. It'll be very obvious. And then at a later time, coming and developing what we call a descendancy chart, which starts with one person in the past and focuses on their line downward to some point, usually the current day, but it doesn't have to go that far.
Hmm.
So I think that if you see some of the charts that are available, you'll see abbreviations or codes. This chart is very nice because it spells out born, place, married, died, and place. But you will see some that will just have B and P, which is birth date and birthplace, and M for married, and D for death date, and P for death place. But it's all the same, and this is what we call the information that you'd want for the basics. So what you're doing here is you're getting what I call the bones of a particular family, namely yours, and you're putting flesh on the bones when you do something like we did yesterday or in our previous session about filling in interview information about what their lives were like, because people, of course, were more than just dates and places, but this is the place to begin. So I'm going to leave this at this particular point and hope that you can get started. Record keeping is a very essential thing. When you start to accumulate information, you'll want to be able to retrieve it, not just for yourself, but for others that you're going to leave it for or share it with. And so my encouragement to close this out is that you may want to start either an electronic folder or an actual physical folder, a manila folder in a file cabinet for each name, each surname that you're searching, and so that you'll be able to have a chance to organize your data.
This is great, David. Thank you so much. And I want to let people know that, this video is going to be available online. The documents that you've talked about in this video will be available on the ostervillevillagellibrary.org website under online learning. And you'll be able to start right away getting going on your family, and would love to hear back from you how you make out. So David, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you very much for the chance.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.